Welcome. I'm Father Jim Forson, and I'd like to share with you a few reflections on the gospel from the 15th Sunday in Ordinary Time. You know, my mom was a Catholic school teacher for over 28 years. And during that time, mostly teaching fifth graders, she brought home with her some of those habits from the classroom. And one of them was whenever I was in a conversation with mom, inevitably she would be saying to me, Jim, look at me, look at me. Now, mind you, it made no difference if I was 38 years old and hearing this, and I would say to mom, Mom, I'm 38 years old. I don't need to look at you to hear you. I'm listening. But nope, no good. She had to see my eyes. She had always said, Look at me. And, maybe you parents have that same experience with your kids. You don't know if they're listening or paying attention, and you say the same thing to them, Look at me. And it's not just for kids either. Adults do this with each other all the time. Would you put down the TV clicker? Would you turn off ESPN and put the paper down, pay attention to me? Get off TikTok, will you? We say that to each other all the time. And so does Jesus in the gospel today. When he is saying they have eyes but see not, ears but hear not. And he even ends this parable today with the words, let those of you who have ears, let them hear. Or in other words, listen to me, look at me. Especially because the parable that he is telling is so rich and powerful a parable, it encapsulates the entirety of the Gospel of Matthew. Not just that, it encapsulates the entire mission of Jesus Christ, what he came into this world to teach us. And we all know this parable. It's the parable of the sower and the seed, where it shows the sower going out into the fields, and he's just flinging the seeds everywhere. And some fall on good soil, some fall among the thorns and are choked to death, and some fall on dry ground and don't grow at all. We know that parable. And in that parable, we hear great truths, two great truths. One about God, and that truth about God is this. God is a terrible farmer. The people listening to this parable in Jesus' time would have been scratching their heads thinking, what kind of a farmer is that? Nobody takes seeds and just flings them out there. It's too precious. You take those seeds and you plant them individually, one by one, measuring the distance between each seed so that each has a chance to be able to grow. You don't just throw them out there. That's the example that Jesus uses to try to explain to people God. Because God is scandalously generous. Those seeds, God's grace, his word, he just flings it out there for everybody. He doesn't discriminate. He doesn't pick and choose. He doesn't decide, okay, you get my grace and you don't get my grace. No, he just throws it all out there. That's his nature. And we know it's his nature because it bothers us when we see people who are prospering that we feel have no right to be prospering. The Psalms even said it. God, why is it that the good fall by the wayside and the evil seem to prosper? It doesn't seem fair. That's the truth about God. When it comes to giving his grace, he doesn't play fair. He gives it to everybody. Jesus even understood this about God when he said, God's sun shines on the good as well as the evil. All get to receive its warmth. God is scandalously generous. He's not like us. And isn't it good, thank God, that God is not like us? That he doesn't pick and choose. He doesn't hold back. He doesn't say something like, I don't know if I'm going to give you grace. Now, you better do something to merit it. You better earn it. You better clean up your act. And once you do that, well, then maybe I'll start throwing seeds your way. I'll start sending my grace your way. He's not like that. He just gives it all away. That's the great truth that's in this parable. And there's a second great truth, and that's about us. That in each human heart, in every single one of us, there are 3 types of soil, three parts. There is within every human heart a dead spot, a dead part, dry land where nothing grows, where there is no life. And in every human heart, there is a part where there is no life. And there's no life because I don't want there to be life. I remember when my dad died, and the pain was so bad. I realized that when somebody else that I loved would die, that it would be just as painful. And the thought of having to go through that again was so frightening to me that I started keeping people at a distance from me. I wasn't mean or anything. I wasn't nasty or anything like that. I was nice, but still, I wasn't letting anybody get close to me because I didn't want to have to go through that pain again. And that part of my heart died. It was dry and it was lifeless. And every single one of us, for one reason or the other, have a part of our lives where we've been hurt or wounded and we just won't let anybody in. And it's dead there. And there's another part of our life, the part with the thorns. That's the part of our life where it's prickly and we can hurt people when they reach out and touch and find those thorns there. And we don't change that either. Sometimes we're even happy that they get hurt because they've hurt us. And the idea of them being hurt by those thorns that we have in our life, you would think would lead us to pulling out those thorns, but we don't. Because if we grab hold of those thorns within our own lives, then we get hurt. And we don't want to feel that pain. I think of a friend of mine who's struggling terribly with alcoholism right now, and those thorns are hurting everybody in his family. The spouse, the kids, the in-laws, everybody's hurting. And you want to say, reach in and grab those thorns and pull them out, but he doesn't. He doesn't want to. He doesn't want to go through the pain of it. And so he just lets those thorns be, even though they're hurting him and hurting others. We all have that within us. We all have those thorns there. And they stay there because it's just too painful to deal with. And there's that third part of our hearts where there's the good soil. And that seed, God's grace, falls on that good soil. And as Jesus said, when it does, it will produce a tremendous harvest. In those days, a great harvest for a farmer would be a 7, maybe an 8% return on what he sowed. Maybe if you got a 10% return, that would be fantastic. Jesus didn't say that. He said, with God's grace on good soil, the return, the harvest, the yield is 30%, 60%, 100%. The people on that day would have heard that and thought, that's impossible. You'll never get that kind of return. It just can't happen. But that's what Jesus saw would happen inside the human heart when God's grace would fall on good soil. Now, mind you, he was saying this sitting in a boat, talking to a crowd of people, many of whom were there because they wanted more food. And they were there because they wanted to be healed. They were there for all kinds of reasons. They weren't quite understanding at all what Jesus was about. And for that matter, neither were his apostles. They were kind of in between doubt and faith. They didn't understand what was going on. And who could have blamed Jesus? Sitting in that boat saying, I am wasting my time. Nobody's getting anything. Let's push out into the sea. Let's go somewhere else. This is a waste of time. We're getting nowhere. Who would have blamed him? But he didn't. He had faith in them. The same way that God has faith in his people, which is why he is continuously flinging out his grace. Jesus had faith in his people, that somehow, some way, God's grace was going to change their hearts, and they would produce an incredible harvest, 30, 60, 100-fold, unimaginable. And he was right. That's exactly what happened. Jesus said to his apostles once, you will do far greater things than I ever did. And he was right. They did. They finally got the message. That grace found good soil. And look what they did. They produced this incredible church that we live in today. All because that grace produced within their hearts this incredible harvest, 100-fold for them. And it can be the same way for us. Jesus calls us today to let God's grace fall on that good soil. And if it does fall on that good soil, we start to become terrible farmers. We start to become like God. And we just start flinging our love, our grace out there. We start loving the way God loves. And if we do that, something else could happen. We could look at that dry, dead, lifeless part of our hearts. And maybe, well, as the poet said, I did not realize how dry was my heart and how great was my thirst until God sprinkled heaven's rain upon me. And maybe if we feel God's heaven's rain upon us, that grace, that dry part of our hearts, maybe we start to let it come back to life too. And then maybe with that dry part of our hearts come back to life and the good soil filled with life, maybe then we'll have the courage to reach out and grab those thorns, regardless of how painful it is, and rip them out. Because who wants to go through life hurting others? And who wants to go through life afraid of being hurt? And that's the vision of Jesus, of God and of us. That's his gospel. That was his mission come to earth to proclaim. It's all right there. The essence of Christianity. God, scandalously generous. The human heart capable of a harvest 100-fold. Sounds nice, doesn't it? Maybe even sounds impossible, doesn't it? Well, that's why Jesus has this parable, and he ends it with, to those of you who have ears, let them hear. Or in other words, look at me. Look at me.